Sally Ride became the first American to blast off into space, but beneath her unflappable composure, she carried a secret. Sally's life partner, Tam O'Shaughnessy, reveals their hidden romance and the sacrifices that accompanied her 27 years together with Sally, telling the full story of this complicated and iconic astronaut for the first time. We're joined today by the director, producer, and co-writer of the documentary film Sally, who was here a few years ago with Darren Foster to talk about her previous work, the collaboration between them, on a wonderful documentary film called Science Fair. She's here today to talk to us about her latest project. Cristina Costantini, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Just a wonderful documentary on a lot of different levels. Not only reminding us of the bravery and the perseverance and determination of Sally Ride and her journey, and to become the first American woman in space on the space shuttle. Wonderful insight into her and her work. Tell me a little bit about how you became interested. And I understand as a child, as a young
Yeah,
woman, you had a particular interest in Sally, but now
yeah,
you've been able
exactly.
to carry it forward. So tell us a little about when you decided you wanted to do this and why.
Yeah, so like many young girls, I loved Sally, and I think it was just very simple. If a girl could go to space and if she could, wear a cool jumpsuit and do big brave things, like maybe I could do big brave things too. And it was a very simple equation for me. But then, when Sally passed away, I learned with the rest of the world that she was survived by this female life partner of 27 years, and I thought, wow, okay, NASA was barely ready for women. And what would that have been like to be gay, to have a secret, to live your whole life, live almost 30 years with this person and not be able to tell the public or just oftentimes I think I've learned through making this film that oftentimes our heroes hurt the people closest to them for the benefit of people they'll never meet. And so I really wanted to tell the story of the difference between a public figure and their private life. I met Tam O'Shaughnessy and I was blown away by her and her desire to be vulnerable. And so I think that's when I really knew that we had a story, was meeting Tam. National Geographic and the production company Story Syndicate were already had this project in the works, and I emailed National Geographic, and it was this great moment of kismet, and we got to work together, and it's been a great joy to be able to be part of telling this important story of this national icon.
An amazing person on many different levels. And I believe Liz Garbus is part of the executive producer on this film, and obviously, to my mind, one of the great documentary filmmakers out there. And so I'm glad to see you guys collaborating.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Story Syndicate has been, this was they originated the story with National Geographic, and it was just, we were all kind of blown away that the story hadn't been done. When I first started thinking about it, I was like, well, I'm sure it's been done a million times. And then we were all really surprised that the story had never been told. Yeah, it was a great privilege to be able to work with this team.
Well, I want to get the business out of the way first. I want to let people know that Sally will be available beginning on June 16th on Nat Geo, that channel, as well as will be launched onto Disney and Hulu on the following Tuesday, which is June 17th. So you'll be able to watch this if as soon as then, and I urge you to do so. Then you go to nationalgeographic.com, I believe is where you would want to go to start your journey into watching the film. What I really like about the film, not only getting to know Sally Ride and her life and her upbringing, which really plays a large part, in my opinion, into the way she conducted the part of her life that you were just talking about. There's this really interesting back and forth between you and her mother in the film,
Yeah.
which is kind of jarring actually in some ways.
Yeah.
But I like the way you leaned into this part of her story. I really like the way that you integrated it into the telling of the story of Sally Ride and her journey as a scientist and an astronaut, but also it allows us to really lean into her as a person.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Sally was not very in touch with her emotions. She was not a very emotional person. She was I mean, I think part of what made her an incredible astronaut was her ability to push those emotions down. And they also made her very hard to be in a relationship with. And it made her very hard to figure out what she was thinking at all times. And I think the real like core of that was the people closest to you who teach you those lessons, your parents, were also very repressed people. And so one of what you're referring to is this interview I did with Joyce Ride, who was 100 years old when I did that interview. She's now 101. And she was the hardest interview I've ever done in my life, and it had nothing to do with her age. She's sharp as a tack. She was very verbose off camera, but as soon as I put her on camera and I asked her the simplest of questions, she shut me down at every single turn. And she doesn't like talking about emotions. And I said to her, I think the question is, what are your feelings about talking about feelings? And she says, if I knew, I certainly would not tell you. And I love that. I love that answer so much. I think leaving that interview, the toughest interview of my life. By the way, I used to be an investigative journalist, so I've interviewed warlords and drug lords and executives who had things to hide and, just the hardest interviews. But I've never had an interview as hard as that. And my producers were like, "Oh God, why did we waste all that money getting this interview? We never it like we're not going to be able to use any of that." And in the edit, we just started thinking, actually, I think we got a lot. I think her inability to answer the simplest questions or her unwillingness, her combativeness about sharing anything personal at all is more revealing than anything that we could have shown. So we decided to use that kind
I
of
think it's a gem.
Thank
It
you.
really, I mean, I do. I mean, because just as you described it, even within the film, and you see glimpses of that kind of reaction in Sally's responses to other questions about her personal life or her life away from being an astronaut. She
Mm.
just basically slammed the door, not quite of the same ferocity that her
Yeah.
mom did, but nonetheless, she you could tell, and that's really a through line. It provides a through line into her life, into her the way she was.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I think your mom, your dad, that's how you model your own emotions. And if you don't have anyone teaching you, that's you become a Sally.
Well, and not to cast aspersions on the Norwegian people in any way or the Scandinavian people, but it's not uncommon to get a reaction like that from people of that. I mean, it's just sort of been
Yeah,
my
I
experience
mean,
as
I
well.
grew up in the Midwest and I'm kind of a split personality. I have like one side of my family is German from the Midwest and they're very not the most effusive people. And then my other half is Italian Argentinians and they're the most effusive people in the world. And my dad is always crying and happy and sad and says everything he's feeling. And then my mom is very like, Mario, please stop crying. What are you doing? You're scaring the children. So I have experience with both of the extreme versions of that. So
Yeah, I'm German and Irish, so I get it. We will cry at a card trick. I mean, we'll burst into tears. Let's go back to Sally and or sort of as she became, was becoming the astronaut that came where she came from, her background. She's an accomplished student. She really kind of planned. That's the thing about her. Another thing is she seemed to be very deliberate in planning her future and planning where she wanted to go. Let's talk a little bit about that.
well, I think she wanted to be an astrophysicist. I think she really, that was a career path that was open to women at the time. She was incredibly brainy. She liked astrophysics because it was hard, and if you could do it, as Tam says in the film, it means you're kind of hot stuff. Incredibly bright, incredibly amazing athlete. But the career path of astronaut really wasn't open until to women until she was reading in the newspaper at Stanford, like eating breakfast, eating eggs one morning, just saw, oh my God, women can be astronauts now, and she knew immediately that's what I want to do. If I
Wow.
could do that, that's what I want to do. And she went to the astronaut program right after finishing her PhD. I mean, the timing was perfect. A few months later, she was in her car on her way to becoming the first American astronaut. And so I think once she had that goal, once she knew she could do it, she's an incredibly driven person, incredibly competitive person, and she pursued it with amazing intensity and and won.
Yeah,
Here we are
yeah.
talking about her.
The other thing, and I do want to talk about kind of what the culture she was walking into, as
Mhm.
this completely, absolutely alpha male dominant kind of culture she was walking into. I also want to give her a little nudge here and kudos in some ways. She also knew about playing the game. And I think
Mhm.
she was I'll say calculating. I don't think that's a bad word in the context of this, on how to get where she wanted to go once she was in this culture.
Yeah.
Let's talk about just how completely alien what she was when she walked in the door.
Yeah, I mean, they were some of the first women to be at NASA, and not just the first astronauts. And there was a lot of questions like, what does a female astronaut wear? What is a female, what are they like? They were kind of like this foreign species. And so the women in response did everything that they could to just be one of the guys. And they would wear very boxy male clothing. They did not want to draw attention to their femininity at all. They wanted to just conform, conform, conform so that they could they had so much to overcome at that time. They had to be there had to be no doubt in anyone's mind that a woman deserved to be there. And everybody before that who was an astronaut came from this hyper competitive type A male kind of fighter pilot right stuff world, and these women did their best to conform to that. A lot of sexist jokes. I've heard so many sexist jokes that aren't in the film. Such fascination with their body parts, their makeup, like what kind of makeup. One of my favorite parts of the
Yes,
story, the
go ahead.
NASA engineers trying to figure out how to get a woman into space were designing them makeup kits that they could bring with like different shades of eyeshadow and different shades of lip gloss, which I think is so funny. And then it was a 6 day flight, and they packed Sally 100 tampons, and they asked her, would that be the right number of tampons? And to me, that's just embodies, these are the smartest men in the world.
Yes.
These are little rocket scientists, and they can't figure out the basics of the human female menstruation. I think it just embodies how far away they were from integrating
Yeah.
women into that world, that these really basic questions they were getting so wrong. So I think there's a little bit of humor there too.
Yeah, that was
In sort
hilarious.
of-
The,
Yeah.
the spinning tampons was hilarious.
Oh,
That
thank
was
you.
funny. And in some ways, the moon is as far away as their understanding of her, of her.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, that's exactly right. We've figured out how to launch human beings into space. The amount that they've figured out about the astrophysics and the stars, but they can't figure out this thing that has existed on planet Earth for tens of thousands of years that half
Yeah.
of humanity experiences.
Well,
It's
I was going to say, as far as we know, all of them had a mother.
yes,
And so,
sisters, wives, so many people to ask that aren't Sally Ride.
yes. Again, I love the way you lean into these things that were challenges, were barriers, were impediments to getting where she got needed to go. And again, I would go back to my remark about calculation in terms of how she positioned herself to be most likely the first in line to go.
Yeah.
And also, and again, I don't know how to address this except to just say, and also when she got married. And
Yeah.
I don't know what to say about that or even to ask, but
Yeah.
she got married while she
She
was
got married, and it confused everyone. And I think different people have different reads of why she got married. Some people would just say, "Well, she liked Steve, and he was the funniest guy in the astronaut corps, and it was con marriage. It was convenient." But most people would say there's a lot of strategy there, and there's a lot of it was a dangerous time to be gay, and so having a husband
right.
would answer a lot of questions that people might have. It also, if you're competing to be the first, people didn't love the idea of a single woman in space with a bunch of handsome astronaut men, which is a question she got asked many times. So it also was made people feel better to have a married woman in space, interestingly enough. We don't get into that in the film. It was a marriage that lasted a year, a little more. Honestly, perplexed the people closest to her. But I think Sally's very hard to read, and we're not sure exactly what her motivations, but it certainly made for a good headline, as Kathy Sullivan says, kind of the perfect astronaut couple, and may have helped in the process of going to space.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she was incredibly strategic, but it's interesting because no one really knew what they were being measured on. So everybody was just trying to be the best at everything, the best robotic arm operator, the most fun, the best team
Team player.
member, team
Yeah, yeah,
player, right?
yeah.
So Sally was like pretty good at being one of the guys, and some people think that's why she was chosen. She's really funny, and so she's fun to be around. Not as bubbly and vivacious as Judy, but or she didn't like the spotlight. Some people say that was the reason. She didn't want that. Like Neil Armstrong didn't want to be a public figure, and people think that's why he was chosen over Buzz Aldrin. And yeah, and maybe it was that she didn't actually want that part of the job that made her so good.
Well, I can imagine that in that microscope that she was living under and all the pressure to not only be able to master the skill set that she needed to, all that kind of ether of the male culture that she was in, it would have taken pressure off of her. And I think that's probably in on that alone, for that reason alone,
Yeah.
sure. And they were friends and they knew each other well enough and
Yeah.
he seemed fine with it. And I don't know. I'm not getting into all the vagaries of
No, I
why,
think you're right. I think you're,
but it did take a lot of pressure off of her.
yeah, it answers a lot of questions and it kind
Yeah.
of closes a door that you don't want opened if you're in an incredibly homophobic period competing for something that's incredibly high profile
And you're the first to do it.
in the first thing. The
So
microscope I would never want to be under.
well, and I think she handles it beautifully, and I love the people that you bring in that we get a chance to, because she was an accomplished tennis player before all of the science came into her life, and that's where she met Tam. I do want to spend a little time talking about Tam because wonderful presence, beautiful to just hear her perspective on the film, getting to know her. Let's talk a little bit about getting to know Tam O'Shaughnessy.
Tam is an incredible person, and I don't think the film would have worked at all without her. She's kind of the secret to make it all work because Sally is so hard to understand. You very much need an ambassador to interpret everything that Sally chose to do, and no one understands her better than Tam. When I first met Tam, she said she didn't want to just tell the kind of like glossy version of Sally's story, enumerate Sally's accomplishments, but she wanted to tell a story of a real person who was complex and flawed and made mistakes and hurt people. And I think that that is way more interesting um, than just like she was great and she did everything really well. And she's, if you try really hard, you can do big things, which is an important story and a part of the story. But I think it's a more inspirational story to have somebody who is not good all the time, who is doing things that are maybe, hurt someone's feelings or like in sabotaging Kathy in the robotic arm simulator. Like, that's a very competitive person. Whether or not she was joking, it's such a high stakes joke that it tells you a lot about a person and who they are. So, I think Tam wanted to tell a more interesting story about who Sally was, and that was what made the film able to be a more complex portrait of
Amen.
our hero.
Amen to all of that. It's true. Well, I just want to also recognize Sally as the winner of the Alfred P. Sloan Feature Film Prize at this year's Sundance Film Festival. Congratulations on the award. And as I said, Sally will be on Nat Geo beginning on Monday, June 16th, and then will launch on Disney Plus and Hulu on Tuesday, June 17th, and seeing that one last thing, seeing that ceremony where Tam gets the Medal of Honor from Barack Obama is truly an amazing sequence in the film. I just there's so much here to recommend. So thank you so much for this wonderful documentary film, Sally. We've been speaking with the director, producer, and co-writer of, as I said, the documentary film, Sally, Cristina Costantini.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it. It's lovely to see you again.
Continue your success. I look forward to another conversation somewhere. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike.